This episode was brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for business. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to Unstoppable today. This is his second appearance on Unstoppable, and when we created the podcast Unstoppable, I'm pretty sure that we probably had this gentleman in mind. Steven Kotler is a four-time New York Times best-selling author. He's written 13 books. 10 of them have been bestsellers. 4 of them have been on the New York Times best-selling list. 2 of them have been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. And I've only just discovered it wasn't until he was actually in his 40s that his mum told him that he was proud of him. So this guy is phenomenal. Now, what's most important about you, Steve, which we're going to dive right into here, you've just written your latest book, The Art of Impossible, but you literally are the number one expert in the world as far as I'm concerned when it comes to understanding high performance, understanding the frameworks for peak performance, but more specifically, the concepts that enable people to achieve those states that you refer to. And I'm pretty sure you would be considered the doctor of flow. Great to have you on the podcast, mate. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back with you.
Now, it's fair to say you've got a little bit of a book addiction. I'm going to assume that you've probably read a lot more books than you've written. Just out of curiosity, random question: how many books do you think you have read? I can see your library back there. I'm not sure if that's...
So we actually tried. Somebody on my staff tried to figure this out. They came out somewhere around 5,000. It's a guess. It's a guess, but 5,000 was the number they came out with.
Yeah, wow. And I'm going to assume
I can tell you that in my library in my house, there's a couple thousand, 2,000-3,000 books. I've lost a lot of books over the years, and the reason what's funny about them is I take my notes in the back of the books. So literally, you could go through the books and my notes are still in all of them. So I have actual proof, because I sometimes don't believe it, that I've read these books.
Mate, I dare say at one stage when your legacy is continuing to grow and your estate is put on the market at some point by your kids, those books are going to be worth an enormous amount of money. But there is a question I do want to ask: is Harry Potter in there at all? Is the Harry Potter series in there?
No, there's no Harry Potter series in here. I'm sorry.
Because I'm pretty sure Harry had some flow concepts that he put out there, but they're a little bit more magical. Mate, you literally are the doctor of flow as far as I'm concerned. I'm someone who's obsessed with performance. You know, I've had the great privilege of being able to train with the Navy SEALs, the European Special Forces, elite professional athletes, and not just train with them, but I consult back to all those people as well with what I've learned and what I've taken away from other areas. How is it? We'll just start there, because I know we touched on this in the last podcast, but for those who didn't hear it, how is it that you stumbled across this arena?
So it's a great question, because it's also sort of it's the center of the new book. So in a sense, so when I became a journalist right out of college, basically in the early 1990s, and journalism is this wonderful career where you get to exploit your curiosities, anything you're deeply passionate about that you can find work. And I was super passionate about 2 things at that point. One was human performance, and really focusing on the neurobiology, the neuroscience. In the 90s, neuroscience advanced to the point that we started to understand human behavior. And it was fascinating. How do humans work? And at the mechanistic level, and neuroscience seemed like the new key. And simultaneously, I was fascinated with action sports and surfing, skiing, rock climbing, snowboarding, and the like. And if you know anything about action sports in the 1990s, you know that it is considered the great era of quote-unquote impossible, where more impossible feats, things that had never been done before and were really considered not ever going to be done, were not just being done, they were being iterated upon over and over and over again. And I was reporting on this, and it was amazing. Nobody had ever seen anything like it in surfing and skiing and rock climbing and snowboarding, mountain biking. The level of performance kept going up and up and up and up, and it was astounding. And more specifically, what really caught my attention is I was living in these communities with these athletes. I knew a lot of them. They were friends with me, and most of the people I knew had horrific childhoods. They came from very bad, tough beginnings. Broken homes and whatnot. They had very little money. They had very little education. There was incredibly high-risk behavior all over the place. There was a lot of drugs and a lot of alcohol. And normally, you don't have to be studying psychology and neuroscience to know, you put those things together in a community, you tend to get jail and death. What you don't get is a group of people who are routinely reinventing what is possible for our species. And that's what was happening. So the first question was, what the hell was going on? I quickly took that question of how are these athletes doing the impossible into pretty much every domain imaginable. I took them out of sports and into business, into science, into technology, into altruistic endeavors, and basically just went hunting for times where things that we believed were formerly impossible became possible. This was my beat as a journalist for magazines like Wired and the New York Times. I would cover sci-fi technologies that had turned into sci-fi technologies. It didn't matter where I went. What I kept seeing, one, was the state of consciousness known to researchers as flow. Right? I kept seeing the state of optimal performance showing up with the athletes, showing up with the technologists, showing up every domain I was looking at. And then I was seeing a handful of other things as well. But flow and how it kept coming up in these experiences. And I was obsessed very early on figuring out, how does flow work? The neurobiology of flow. We were just starting to decode it in the 1990s and late 1990s. And my mentor, Dr. Andrew Newberg, was one of the first people sort of in there. And so I really have spent the past 30 years from that point on saying, okay, whenever we see extreme performance improvement, what the hell is going on under the hood? And the answer is that you actually see very, very similar things no matter where you look, and there's really good reasons for it. And this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll kick it back to you because it's been a long, ridiculously long answer to your question. When I say peak performance, when we're talking about peak performance, when we're talking about anything that my research has uncovered, or really the field has uncovered over the past 30 years, is peak performance is nothing more, nothing less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. That's all we're talking about. Flow is at the center of that biology, but there's a bunch of other things going on. And figuring that out has essentially been what my career has been about.
And it's a pretty exciting one. I am curious though, because I didn't ask you this question last time. Did you discover a connection with all those extreme sports people who had those backgrounds, coming from, in some cases, what would be considered dysfunctional environments, broken homes, addiction present, abuse present? Did you find any connection? And if so, what was the connection between those backgrounds and those upbringings and these individuals who were able to iterate on what was considered impossible?
So flow is the foundational connection. And so whenever you're talking about peak performance, right, I said it's a sequence and a system, and I alluded to that. There's the human biological cognitive performance skill set is really, it's a set of skills that we file under motivation, right? It's wider than motivation, but we call the motivation as the heading. There's a set of skills that sit under the heading of learning. There's a set of skills that sit under the head of creativity. And then there's a set of skills that sit under the heading of flow. So whenever you see peak human performance, you're seeing individuals maximize all those sets of skills because there's nothing else going on. So you're looking at the very same thing. And the way to think about that, they sound like four random things. Let me just put it in a sentence for you so you can wrap your head around the picture. The way to think about this is, and by the way, when I say skill sets, so I'm going to use the term motivation. When psychologists use motivation, they mean what most people mean, the energy required for action, right? But motivation is a catch-all term. It means extrinsic motivation, stuff that's outside of ourselves, money, sex, fame. Intrinsic motivation, curiosity, passion, purpose. They also mean goal setting and grit. All of those skills get lumped under motivation. So skill sets, but motivation is what gets you into the game. Learning is what allows you to continue to play. Creativity is how you steer, especially if you're steering towards, high, hard, impossible goals where you're not quite sure how to get there. You need creative decision-making, problem solving to get there. And then flow is how you amplify the whole package, right? Usually beyond all reasonable expectations, because that's what flow does. It's a magnificent kind of accelerant to all our skills, as you know.
I'm going through the process right now of training my dog. I've got a brand new, beautiful German Shepherd puppy. I have aspirations to get myself a Malinois, and I'm going through the process of training this dog to be a bit of a lethal weapon. And I know this is going to sound like an unusual question, but it kind of relates to the last one that I had around the correlation between people's childhoods and their ability to have the levels and the motivations and the skill sets to perform at high levels. One of the things that I've discovered that makes certain dogs, you've got an interest in dogs, right? You've got
Yeah,
a
I mean, you're talking to a huge animal rights advocate, and I run an
yep.
animal sanctuary. My wife and I run a dog sanctuary.
Exactly. So you're familiar with the personalities of the different breeds, Malinois and German Shepherds, and how they are, in most cases, very high drive dogs, very high motivation. They've got very high levels of motivation to learn and very high levels of motivation to work. But what I found really interesting when I was comparing the breeds between the German Shepherd and the Malinois have a very strong lack of self-preservation. And as a result, they're willing to throw themselves into increasingly more dangerous situations that other breeds, including shepherds, may not necessarily go to the same lengths in order to, get the job done, so to speak. So I am curious, and again, I know this is a left field question. Is there any connection or correlation between high performance, high flow states? And I know X Games and being in flow and playing chess are not necessarily the same things. But is there a correlation between self-preservation and the ability for people to perform at certain levels that would be considered above and beyond the capacity of what's normal?
It's a super hard question. And there's a couple of different ways to answer it. So let's go back to your early childhood question for a second, because I want to touch on something, and then we'll go into this. The one thing that I will tell you, whenever I see success, true success in the world, doesn't matter, business success, sports success, athletic success, whatever, everybody I've met is running from something just as fast as they're running towards something. The most successful people I've met have, and one of the ways I always explain that is it is really hard to get to any place worth going to. It just is. And you need a lot of motivation. And that double motivation of running away from something and running towards something seems to be very beneficial. I will tell you, in peak performance, the one group of people, and I haven't done research on this at all, so I could be talking out of my ass here, but the one group of people who I worry about the most and see the wobbliest are people who had really easy times in childhood and high school. Like, everything went super, super, super well, and they were attractive. They had enough money. They were popular. They were good in sports. They even did good on tests. Those people, those are the people. They some of them do very well in life, but you don't often see them at the spectacular level. You just don't. Which I'm not saying that's a death sentence if that's where you're at and who you are, because obviously there are exceptions everywhere. In fact, when we're done with this call, I'm doing a live event with 4 very famous professional athletes, some of the most decorated action sport athletes ever. And of the 4, one of whom I know has had that childhood that I just described and said, hey, this does not tend to produce this. So he had that very easier childhood, and it did, in his case, produce excellence. So not always. I guess there was one exception to my statement that I can think of now. But as a general, I think that's true.
Do you think there's a correlation? I know this is a bit of a side note here, and I hope you don't mind me smashing your chain of thought because I can see you're in it. But do you think there's a correlation between those early childhood environments and being exposed to certain stresses, which would be considered a threat, which on some respect would give people a conditioning towards risk taking? Because most people don't take a risk because there's a correlation between, it's a risk, there's a threat there, and there's a stress response. Do you think there's a correlation there between these early childhood experiences and being exposed, and I guess you could say conditioned to threat, conditioned to stressful environments that makes them go, you know what, my risk profile unconsciously is going to be a little bit greater?
So I think there's a handful of things that may fall under this category, and I don't know. Right? I don't know. I normally would dodge questions like this because I don't like to answer questions where I'm just talking out of my butt. But here's what I
theoretical.
Think. Theoretically what I would say is this. So risk tolerances are genetically hardwired and established by early childhood experience. They are. They're usually set up and sort of, they're not locked in. You can change them over time, but it's slowly. But usually by 10, 11, 12, they're pretty set up. What you see is with difficult childhoods, you see a lot of grit training, first of all. And grit's a very, like, we are incredibly, one of the research shows consistently that human beings are unbelievably gritty. Our grit levels, everybody's grit levels are super deep. But the only way you find out how gritty you are is by being pushed to the edge again and again and again. And that's an uncomfortable process for anyone. And so it's harder to train, though there are ways to train it very effectively. I think that kind of childhood trains that. I also want to say, now, there's huge swatches of people who come out of these communities where the disadvantages crush them, right? There's too much anger. There's too much resentment. There's too much spite. There's too much of that stuff. That said, if you can get past those things, one of the other things that I think is really, really important is if you grow up in dangerous environments of any kind, unpredictable environments, you also get very good with people. You have to learn to read people very fast. Now that gives you a level, and as a result, you often gain a bunch of self-awareness along the way, because the only way we read other people is, read ourselves at the same time. And those skills, the self-awareness and the emotional awareness of others, if you can spin it around and turn it into emotional intelligence, we know, for example, I talk about emotional intelligence a bit in Art of Impossible, but the famous work on emotional intelligence is that IQ gets you hired and EQ gets you promoted. So one of the things that you also see that it's often not talked about, I always tell people in life, one of the things that we know, for example, about flow and a bunch of other stuff is that training your strengths is really a great thing. In flow science, this is not my work, this is Dr. Martin Seligman's work and Christopher Peterson's work, but they found that if you work in such a way as you're using one of your core strengths in a novel way, it tends to lead towards a higher flow lifestyle. So they basically say identify your top 5 strengths, try to use one in a novel way, do them in like 3-month training periods kind of thing and cycle through them. And that tends to lead to much more flow. When you're identifying your strengths, one of the things I always tell people is the real world identifies strengths. However, the real world, what I mean, Strength Finder, you can find all these diagnostics, but truthfully, everybody has what I like to talk about as invisible skills. And the example I like to give is if you grew up in a difficult household where mom and dad were fighting a lot or drinking a lot and fighting a lot, and you know how to defuse an argument, or you know how to defuse a drunken argument, which is a skill set that a lot of people actually acquire, right, the hard way, but you acquire it. That's a real world skill set. You can defuse an argument without it escalating. You can, you know what I mean? You have those are real people skills. There's something there that can be built upon as well. So that stuff can easily break you, but if it doesn't, it leads to wonderful things. And the final thing I want to point out on this is that what the research is really clear on is every one of our so-called Achilles heels, our kryptonite, whatever it is, those are all our biggest weaknesses. That's the foundations for every one of our superpowers, right? And that for sure, you build your superpowers out of your weaknesses. And the final thing I want to say on this, because it's insidious in the world today, and I don't know where it came from. There's this idea right now that's been floating around the high performance world that if you're broken, you somehow got to fix what's broken in you before you can start going after your goals or trying for peak performance. And I think nothing could be farther from the truth, right? Like peak performance, it's just the same biology. And I think usually the easiest way to fix what's broken is actually to start aiming bigger and moving in that direction, because the skill sets, the same skills that will get you from subpar back to zero will get you from zero up to Superman. They're the same. There's some different stuff you might want to do if you're talking about extreme trauma and deep trauma and things like that. But other than that, as a general rule, you're dealing with the same skill sets, which is one of the reasons I think you see a lot of what we're talking about.
Mate,
people who started out really broken, ending up at the top.
And there's more I want to ask on that, but I'm going to put my selfish desires aside here, because this book that's just come out, The Art of Impossible, you said yourself, this is the first time you've really put it together in a really practical blueprint that people can take away. So when you look at what you've created with The Art of Impossible, what is the framework? Because The Art of Impossible is essentially, it's relating to peak performance.
Yeah, so let's let me
define that.
Yeah. So let's first of all let's start with the term impossible. The book is, in a sense, neurobiological lessons learned from watching people accomplish what I would term capital I impossible. The book is really meant to be used. It could be used by anyone, but it's really meant to be used. Who I wrote it for, in a sense, was people who are going after what I would call small I impossible. That which we think is impossible for ourselves. Let me give you a handful of examples. When I was growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, blue-collar steel mill town, 1970s. It's from the time I was a little kid, I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know any writers. I didn't know how you became a writer. There was no internet. There were almost no books. There was no one around to ask. It was like one morning I woke up and I said, Mom, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a hobbit. Right, for all I knew about like how to become one, right? Like that was essentially what I was saying. That's a small I impossible. Getting paid doing what you love is a small I impossible. Rising out of trauma is a small I impossible. Becoming world class at anything is a small I impossible. Becoming a successful entrepreneur is a small I impossible.
Are you saying small I or small lie
small
possible?
I, like letter I,
Gotcha.
letter I. My flat Midwestern accent is crushing me. Sorry. And then, but the other thing is this. Most importantly, I don't care if you're interested in capital I impossible, small I impossible, or just I want to go to work next Monday and I'd like to be a little more productive, right?
So there's a scale. There's a small I and a capital. So depending on the level of
this is where I was going. The tool set's the same.
Okay.
There's just your biology, right? You either get your biology working for you rather than against you, or you don't. It's really what it is. What is different, what has changed, and what's at the heart of this book that I think is neat is for a long time, 20, 30 years, we've all seen bits of this. Like there's books on flow, and there's books on grit, and there's books on gratitude or mindfulness or flow or all the different components that we talk about so much, learning, creativity. What has happened over the past 5-6 years, because neuroscience has advanced a lot, is we've started to realize that, holy crap, this stuff is a system. It's designed to work in a certain way, in a certain sequence. And if you bring the skills online this way, in this sequence, the way we evolved to do it, right? You go so much farther, so much faster, and pardon the alliteration, but with far less fuss.
So where does the framework start? Like if there's a framework to the art of impossible and you're going to sit down and go, okay, I'm going to teach you how to align your biology and your psychology and your physiology to do things that maybe right now you don't think are possible. Where do you start?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, the book starts with motivation, and let's talk about where the research starts. The research into motivation says you've got to start with extrinsic motivation, so external motivation. People don't like this factor, and especially in the spiritual New Age community. They're like, no, it's all about passion, and it sort of is in a second. We'll get there, but the research is really clear. We have to be able to earn enough to cover our basic needs with a little left over for discretionary spending, because anxiety, more specifically norepinephrine and cortisol, which is what's underneath anxiety, are such blockers to peak performance. If you cannot, if you're wondering where's my meal coming from, how am I going to pay my rent, how am I going to take care of my wife, my kids, my family, my husband, whatever it is that's on your plate, if you're probably too scared at a foundational level. Right, you have to solve that problem first. Once that problem is solved, and so the research, this is not my work, this is Dr. Daniel Kahneman's work, the Nobel laureate. Danny did most of this work, but he found in America, this is about 10 years ago, that for a single family household, that number is a lot lower than most people think for a family. So husband, wife, kids, $75,000 a year. So you can pay all your bills, take care of everybody in the family, and have a little left over for discretionary income. So it's less than most people think. I don't know what that would be on an individual level, but it's not a ton. Once that's lined up, you need to turn to intrinsic, internal motivators. If you're interested in performance, I'm not saying when you make a little bit, you can cover your bills and have a little bit left over. We stop wanting things like money, sex, and fame. Of course, we keep wanting them, right? But if you're really interested in amplifying performance measures, productivity, learning, creativity, motivation, all that stuff, intrinsic drivers become more important. They take over, and there's a ton of intrinsic drivers, but for this conversation, 5 matter. There are a big 5, and they're designed to work, as I said, in a specific order. Curiosity is the most foundational human motivator. It is, it's neurobiologically a little bit of norepinephrine and a little bit of dopamine. It is designed to be built into passion. So what we call passion, which is another big intrinsic driver, is really biologically nothing more than the intersection of multiple curiosities with some wins in that area. Some, easy little successes is what I was trying to say.
Would you say that curiosity is important because some people stop once they get they might be curious, they might find something they enjoy, but then if they don't have a high drive of curiosity and they don't keep looking, they might not find something that's even more enjoyable.
Thing is, that's why curiosity is when we talk about passion, you're talking about the intersection of multiple curiosities. I always tell people a single curiosity, there's not enough energy there over the long haul to sustain you. It's gonna go away. You got to find, and by the way, if you want to send your listeners to thepassionrecipe.com, www.passionrecipe.com, this chunk of what we're talking about, we built it into a little, like a free interactive workbook that teaches people how to do this, because so many people want to know how to do this. It's in the book. It's in The Art of Possible. Everybody read the book. Go to Amazon, buy dozens of copies. But when you're done doing this, if you want something for free, go to the Passion Recipe. So curiosity is designed to be built into passion. Passion is designed to be coupled to something outside of ourselves, which gets you purpose. Once you have purpose, which is an even bigger motivator. When you say bigger motivator, what I mean is...
Is that number 2?
No. Curiosity is 1. Passion is 2. Purpose is 3. Once you have purpose, what does the system want? Freedom, autonomy. That's the next big driver, because you want the autonomy to pursue that purpose, right? You've got a purpose now. You want the freedom to go after it. What do you want after that? Mastery, the skills to go after it well. So the place to start is literally, you got to solve the extrinsic, which I'm assuming a lot of your listeners already have. And then you move into this stack. And once you're through there, it goes on. The system is, then you add goals. And what the biology, what the science tells us is you need 3 levels of goals to get the greatest lift in motivation. You need a mission level statement for your life, like mission level goals. I want to be the greatest writer in the history of the universe. That's a mission level goal. Underneath it, you need high hard goals. These are the 1 to 5 year steps that feed into that mission level goal. If I want to be the greatest writer in the history of the universe, this would be, I want to go to college and get a degree in journalism. I want to get a job on a magazine or a newspaper to learn how to write, or I want to start a blog. I want to, write a book on cooking and blah, 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 take your pick. Those are high hard goals. And then you need clear goals. These are your daily to-do lists. And they all have to be pointing in the same direction, and they all have to be aimed at your entire stack of intrinsic motivators. And the way to think about this is just that, like, peak performers, they want as much fuel as they possibly can get, right? Because it's hard to go A to B. So you get your externals right. You get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. You get plenty of hydration, plenty of nutrition, and you get your fats and your carbs and your proteins, and same way you want to stack and align all your internal motivators, right? Because it's hard to go A to B, but if you get them all pointed in the same direction, the lift is incredible. Bonus, by the way, if you get all these things pointed in the same direction, they tend to produce a lot more flow in your life. So it's some of these things are flow triggers, clear goals, and some of the intrinsic motivators, these are all flow triggers as well. So you get everything pointing in your same life. Part of the reward is you get massive flow as a result.
I'm looking at these intrinsic stack right here, and I'm like, wow, you've really just refined and you've gone and polished the carbon that was, I guess, a lot of that. Because I've seen the work from Chick Me Set Me High, and also Dan Pink, who put together Drive, The Surprising Truth About William, which to me is, I guess you could say, he's compiled some incredible research, but you really put a stack in here that kind of makes a lot more sense, especially adding the curiosity piece. Dan did great work. He really did. Brilliant stuff.
And I think at the time he wrote Drive, that was about as much as we knew. A lot of the stuff that comes afterwards. So Drive is based on most of the work by Dici and Ryan are the 2 main scientists whose work he was drawing upon. Also a guy named McClellan and a couple others. They, from the time that they did that work, they got very jiggy on the neurobiology. So what's underneath it? And it was when you started to peel back the hood and look at it neurobiologically that all the other stuff sort of started to fall into place as well. So some of this is not that any of those guys did bad work. They did great work. Csikszentmihalyi is a god, and Dan Pink's a smart dude.
You've polished it, and that's to me, because I'm an absolute advocate of his work, and I've read.
In a weird way, I got lucky because I showed up at the time the neuroscience showed up, right? I've sort of helped bring that in a little bit, and definitely popularized a lot of those ideas. But like, they were working in an area at a time before we could look into the brain and really figure this stuff out. So I had a little bit of an advantage.
So these 5 intrinsic, is that the framework of the art of impossible, and just combining these together, or is this just step
where
one?
The art of impossible starts with motivation. That's the intrinsic. That's just the intrinsic. Then we do goals, and so grit comes next, and the research shows grit's often talked about as a single skill, but the research shows.
So you've separated grit from mastery.
Yes. Well, so grit gets you. So what you don't want right around the time you get to mastery, right? Yeah. You'll start getting more flow in the system, and you'll add goals. And goals are really the goal setting. Everybody loves the goal setting process. It produces a whole bunch of dopamine. It's really painless. Grit skills is what you want to train next. The people start training grit a little too early, and the problem is, our grit supplies as humans are freaking endless. We can really train grit, as you know from working with spec ops and professional athletes. Grit is immensely trainable. It's just kind of unpleasant to do. We can extend it considerably. You don't want to start training it until you start getting more flow in the equation. Grit without flow is burnout. Grit without flow is burnout. It's literally burnout. I mean, suffering is bad enough, but because suffering is unpleasant, but you get through it. Burnout is like a literal psychological condition at this point, and it's a different thing. The system starts to shut down. You start going backwards no matter how hard you. So that's why you don't want to start layering in grit. And the other thing that's lost in the grit studies is there's 6 layers of grit. If you go out and actually start in it, what we did is we started to notice that in training up flow was remarkably easy to train, but people would wobble with some of these internal skills, grit being one of them. And in researching grit, so most people know about like perseverance, right? This is like,
is this level 1 of the 6 levels?
Level 1, yeah. Perseverance is like, and that's what most people think of as grit. So the next level is thought control. You've got to control what's going on in your brain. Also, it doesn't matter how perseverant you are in the world if you can't get a handle on what's going on in here. And they're different skill sets. They have to be trained differently. Eventually, they come together, but they're trainable. In the front end, you've got to train them differently. Then there's the grit to be your best when you're at your worst. That's essentially what they train Navy SEALs in Hell Week, right? That's the grit to be your best when you're at your worst. And it's a different set of skills. Then the grit to train up your weaknesses. Right? We all have weak links in our armor. That's a different set of skills because weaknesses are specifically hard to train, right? That even if you're trying to be gritty, then there's all kinds of the grit to confront fear and start really negotiating with fear. Because fear, as you know, it's a fantastic tool once you have the fortitude to really deal with it. But if you haven't developed that fortitude yet, you try to like go at risk, go at fear, it can crush a lot of people, right? This is why
But once you build here's what I've learned: once you build a relationship with fear, it's a great drinking buddy. Because
it's the greatest. It's the greatest gift our biology gives us because it tells us where to go next. Peak performers, right?
Yes, so true.
I always tell this to people. Peak performers love working with grit because it gives you that all this stuff, all these internal motivators, all these things we're talking about. What's the big frickin' deal? You get focus for free. Focus for free. When we're passionate, we're paying attention automatically. When you're curious, paying attention automatically. When you have autonomy, paying attention, right? Fear, think about when something scares you. It gets all of your attention, and you don't even have to work one iota for it. So I always explain to people, when I write a book, there are always three challenges. There's the communication challenge. I got an idea. I got to communicate it with you. That's the first challenge. Second challenge is the style challenge. I want to make it, it's art for me. So I want to get the craft right. That's a second challenge. And then I always create a book challenge. Sometimes it's, can I write 2 books in a year or 3 books in a year? Because those are really hard challenges. With Bold, which is a business book I wrote, challenge was really simple. Could I write a business book?
Fuck, I'd be happy to write 1 book in a decade, just to put it out there. So you can brag all you like.
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that.
Well, yeah, you should know because you got a great training program called Flow
yeah,
Writers. That's what you should be saying.
And I got to tell you, I mean, so here's the thing that was explained to me when I was in grad school. I got to study under a guy, Steven Dixon is his name, and he is in English, maybe in other languages, but in English at the time, the most published author in the history of the world. So Chekhov held the record with some ridiculous 300 published works, and this guy Steven Dixon was up to like 600 and some published works when I was studying under him. I mean, it's just crazy. And I'm not talking about like, one of like his book Frog, which won the National Book Award in America. It's like this thick. It's huge. Like these are not even small books.
These aren't articles. These are fucking. These are not ebooks. So these are like Bibles.
My point is, in grad school, I remember him talking to him once, and he said, somebody said, "How the hell have you done this?" He said, "It's easy. I edit a page a day and I write a page a day. And if you do that, you'll have a book a year for the rest of your life."
Fuck, page a day. Fuck, that just humbled me, didn't it? Okay.
Right? I mean, 365 days in a year.
So true. What the fuck? Yeah, my book in a decade, it should be 10 books in a decade. All right, well, you've just put me in my place. You've gone through the grit layers: perseverance, thought control, to be your best at your worst, to train up your weaknesses, control fear. What was number 6? I'm intrigued.
So this is counterintuitive. So really counterintuitive, but peak performers don't like to stop. One of the problems, if you get all your intrinsic motivators pointing in the same direction, right?
Yeah.
Is there's a shitload of fuel in the fire, right? You're burning nitrous at that point, and you're all turbo boosted all the time. And as you know, peak performance requires recovery. You need not only 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, but peak performers need active recovery protocols. So Epsom salt baths, saunas, walks in nature, restorative yoga, massages, foam rolling, take your pick, right? We know this list. It's the grit to recover is the 6th grit skill. It's because right? And it's not that, I mean, everybody knows about recovery skills and we talk about it, you hear it talked about, but it doesn't get put into play, which is why you have to train it as a grit skill, because it's freaking hard for peak performers. This is, by the way, when we do work with members of the special ops community, they like nobody's as guilty of this shit as they are. They cannot shut it down. They cannot shut it down. And you also see this a lot in C-suite executives. And the result is, entrepreneurs are the other category.
They fucking just drive it.
So if you don't have if you have an active recovery protocol and regular access to flow, it is incredibly hard to burn out. There's a couple reasons that will cause it, but regular access to flow and an active recovery protocol is essentially a prophylactic against burnout, which is such a problem with entrepreneurs and with executives. So the grit to recover is really important. So that's sort of.
Go ahead.
By the way, I should tell you, we've just covered motivation. There's a learning section that's just as thick. There's a creativity section that's just as thick. And there's a flow section that's just as quick. The one thing I want to tell you, because this seems like an overwhelming bunch of shit for anybody to learn.
No, this is fucking phenomenal. Like this is for the people that love this shit. This is like pure. This is crystal.
And I will not break this down any further, but I will tell you, as far as the book goes, there's a bunch of onboarding skills. There's a bunch of stuff that you have to do to get into the game, the passion stuff, the purpose stuff. We talked about that stuff. But once you get through the whole onboarding process and sort of get yourself set up to win, peak performance really comes down to about 6 things that you have to do every day and about 7 things every week. And most of the stuff you got to do every day is either really quick stuff or stuff where you'll take other stuff that you were actually doing and it's just a way to approach that stuff. So in other words, it's really doable by almost everybody is the first thing I'd like to point out. It really is. It's a lot that where people get derailed by it, it seems like there are three places. The first is that the tools and techniques I talk about are they're not sexy. Man, there's no whiz bang technology. There's no cool, neat substance. Nothing I do.
Magic
you talk
button.
about it
You
in
mean
a
I just
bar.
can't press a button?
Nope. And I mean, well, one is this is the second thing. There's no shortcut, right? The peak performance is getting your biology work for you rather than against you. That's it. There's no shortcuts. There's no hacks. That's out. It's not sexy, right? You talk about it on the bar on Friday night. It's not going to get you laid. Really, it won't. Like literally, these days people want something sexy. They want something immediate. The third problem is that peak performance always works like compound interest, right? It's about doing the same set of 6 things every day, for months and 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 years and years and years. And that's how that's how this gets done. It really is just
That's
about,
so
it's not
true.
even, and the funny thing is, I always tell people this. I think the only thing worse harder than the pursuit of excellence is not pursuing excellence. To put it differently, and this was maybe
That makes
what
a
we
lot of
can
sense. I bet you're
close
gonna frame the
with.
shit out of this.
I like to tell people that we are biologically hardwired for peak performance. We are biologically hardwired to go after hard goals. We are biologically hardwired to try to live up to our full capability. And the psychologist Abraham Maslow put that in a really great way. He summed it up really nicely. He said, whatever a person can be, they must be. And here's the most important thing about that. The system is designed to go big. Turns out not going big, not using the system the way it was designed is bad for us. And I don't mean in a concrete, hardcore, serious way. Let me give you an example. We've just talked about all the motivation stuff, so this is going to be easy to explain. There are epidemic levels of anxiety and depression in the world today, as you know, right? 1 out of 10 adults is going to be diagnosed over the next year. Somebody kills themselves once every 12 seconds, right? This is a giant plague, and we're failing to solve it. There are 8 major causes of anxiety and depression, and they're well established. 2 of them get all the attention, which are genetics or trauma, right? Genetics is, my genetics are wrong, can't make enough serotonin, I'm depressed. Trauma is, this terrible thing happened, I can't get past it. And yet, if you look at the data, almost impossible that genetics leads to anxiety, depression alone. Genetics can only always be about 50% of it, and the other 50% are usually lifestyle causes. And trauma, the vast majority of the time, trauma leads to post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic stress, right? Trauma this is like the world breaks everyone, and afterwards many are stronger in the broken places, the Hemingway quote, and it's really many, right? Now look at the other 6 major causes of anxiety and depression. What are they? One of them, top one, lack of meaningful work. What does that mean under the hood? It's work that you're not curious about, that's not aligned with your passion, that's not aligned with your purpose, that you don't have the autonomy to pursue the way you want, that doesn't afford you the opportunity for mastery, and it doesn't produce flow. That's what we mean by lack of meaningful work at a neurobiological level. All lack of meaningful values are another one. This is a lack of purpose and a lack of blah, blah. In other words, we are designed to go big. Not going big is bad for us, and we pay for it in anxiety and depression.
Mate, you literally have pulled so much together. And when you said in the beginning, this is 30 years of research pulled together, I won't say I was skeptical. I was like, this will be interesting. But to hear even just a small piece of this is phenomenal. And I just want to point to the part that really hit me the most. I read a book, I think it was about 2002, 2003, called The Powerful Engagement, where they created the framework around the business or the entrepreneurial athlete and looking at how important active recovery is. And you're the first person that I've spoken to in probably maybe 15 years that has actually highlighted that as a part of performance out. Because here's the thing, most athletes know this, right? Most athletes know the importance of active recovery, but most entrepreneurs don't, and right now.
And it's funny because I spend my I'm like you. I spend a lot of time with professional athletes. I ski with professional athletes all winter long. I mountain bike with them all summer long. Um, and I got to train. If you're chasing pro athletes around mountains, you got to be in that kind of shape, and you got to train for that and do all that. And you know what that entails. I will tell you that I think I end up recovering more from hard weeks at work than I do from chasing world-class athletes around mountains, right? Um,
So
I
you
always
need
try
more
to,
recovery from your work
well,
than you do
let
from.
me, yeah, I mean, let me give you a
And no, I
simple
think that's an
example.
important distinction.
And let me give you a simple example. I've been doing a lot of PR press, right? Talking
Yeah.
guys like you, this kind of stuff. Every hour on stage psychologically burns about 8 hours of energy. Like we know this, and it's because we process social
Wow.
stress in the same place we process physical stress. So if you're standing up in front of people and giving presentations, um, that is an incredibly, from an energy perspective, that's incredibly stressful to the body. You ever wonder why leaders of countries age so quickly? Like, right, you look at the before and after photos of like presidents and prime ministers and whatever,
Oh,
you're like,
yeah,
what
fucking
the
makes a
fuck
lot of
happened
sense,
to
doesn't it?
you? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened to them. They're in front of the camera, they're in front of people, and it's literally, it's this is a really weird thing, and we can sort of end with this, but it sort of it's a weird biological thing. When I said that physical pain and social physical pain, like pain of physical injury versus pain of social embarrassment or whatever, they're processed in the same structures as the brain. That sounds like a crazy thing until you realize that if you go back 300 years ago, if you were like 300 years ago, you're living in your village and you screw up and piss people off and get exiled, you're dead. Nobody
Mm.
lives away from the tribe. That's a capital crime. So until very recently, social fears are treated as right
Mm.
primal, right. Here's the big mystery. Why the fuck should fear of public speaking be the number one fear in the world? From an evolutionary perspective, it should be fear of getting eaten by a grizzly bear, right? Or something, oh, great white. Something like that should be, right, from everything we know about evolution, and yet it's public speaking, and this is why. So,
Mm.
for example, with entrepreneurs, especially, you see this a lot. You'll know this exactly, especially ones who are pitching. When you're going around and you're doing like the show in front of VC after VC after VC after VC, all that stuff, that is massively taxing because it's the same level of risk internally as physical danger. Every time you stand up in front of a room full of strangers and pitch your ideas, your brain thinks you're in physical danger. That's how it's
Mm.
processed in the event. So you need to recover as if that's what's going on.
That
Yeah,
makes
when
so
when
much
I mean,
sense.
I the work they did on the corporate athlete, that and energy and that stuff. I often think that the work I do is because that was great biology at the time in the
At
1990s.
the
They
time,
yeah,
yeah.
it was. I mean, it was back in the 90s when they were doing that work. It's very old, but I really like that work. Like they were looking at the same sort of, it was the same sorts of pursuits that I'm just later on in that chain 30 years, right? And we just learned that, like, okay, it's a whole lot more than just energy that's in this equation, but that's a huge it's sort of like there's on the energy side, there's three things that matter. You have to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. You need good hydration, nutrition, and you need good social support. Most people don't know
Mm.
this. So social support
Mm.
actually has an energy cost for us. The reason is whenever we go into a
Yeah, true.
stressful, whenever you solve a problem, if I challenge you, your brain performs a threat assessment. It wants to know, is this a threat? Is this a challenge? You know what I mean? How big is this problem? Right? And so one of the things your brain wants to know is, well, do I have posse around to help me solve this challenge? Right? If you've got a robust social support
Mm.
network, or you have it doesn't mean you have lots of connections. You just have a few solid ones, people who love you and who, you know what I mean? Your brain goes, oh, you got people around to help it, and it gives you more energy. There's a cost to not maintaining good social support. So that's a sort of a peak performance
Mm.
basic. One of the things we talk about that a little bit in The Art of Impossible.
Mate, I got to get this book. I've got to get my hands on this fucking book. It's about time, entrepreneurs and business owners started treating themselves like professional athletes because they're getting paid to play a game. Like esports, it's a professional sport. To me, entrepreneurship is a professional sport, and the fact that we can finish on that is incredible. So, The Art of Impossible, mate. Where can we go to get our hands on a copy?
Amazon. Everybody should go to Amazon.
Amazon.com.
Best place.
All right, we'll put a link below. We'll also put a link in there for the Flow Riders course and Zero to Dangerous, another course that you run as well. Steven, mate, I know you've got a very busy schedule. To me, this has actually been the most exciting podcast I've done this year, if not in the last 2 years, and even better than the first one. Thank you so much for your time, mate. And if there's one thing you want to leave the listeners with, what would it be?
What I've learned over... But buy the book. But seriously, in 30 years of doing this, the one thing I want to leave you with is the thing I learn over and over and over again is that we are all capable of so much more than we know. That's the lesson I learn over and over and over again. But I always say this, human potential is invisible, especially to ourselves, right? We only find out what we're capable of by stretching our skills to the utmost again and again and again. That's how human potential, human capability is actually revealed.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steven Kotler, this has been Unstoppable. This episode is brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for businesses. If you have ever wanted to grow your business faster than what you can right now, if you need to make more revenue, if you need more leads, if you need more clients, if you need to know how to plan your business in a strategic way in order to hit big goals, if you need to learn how to scale your business and grow your team and your business so that you have more freedom, then this program is for you. Imagine 3 days immersed with me where we cover all aspects of business, but we do it from an immersive but also an execution standpoint. We execute every step of the way, and we're looking at 5 key areas. We're looking at your psychology, we're looking at your marketing, your sales, your leadership, and we're looking at your planning and how we integrate these 5 key areas to grow your business and your brand quickly. So if you'd like to find out more information, kerwinray.com.